Welcome again to the Food Freedom Festival. Today, I'm really excited to present to you Dave Wolfe. Dave Wolfe is the co-founder of SugarX Global, and he will be talking about his sugar addiction, his story around it, the recovery, and how important it is to heal your brain in recovering from sugar addiction. And he will also share a great gift at the end. Dave is a recovering addict who detoxed from sugar, grains, and 25 years of ADHD medicines. And this from a former artisan bread baker and registered dietitian. I love his story. He's also the co-author of The Fix for Cravings, and he really understands all the implications around sugar addiction and addiction in general, right? There's so much to be said around how to switch from one to the other. He is the co-founder of SugarX Global. Dave helped develop a system based on care, connection, action steps, recovery, protection, and education, and as well the foundation for addicts to grow, recover, and transform. Welcome, Dave, to our Food Freedom Festival.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
I was really excited when we got together and you said yes to being here on the Food Freedom Festival, because I see that you really have been there and through your own story overcome being addicted to sugar and sugar-like substances, right? And I always find there's a very fine line between addiction and emotional eating, eating disorders and all that. And I would love to explore that a little bit more with you today. So tell us a little bit more about how you became from being sugar addicted to where you're today.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I didn't really realize the behaviors I had until I realized I had the behaviors that I had. It was actually, I was being interviewed as part of a training I was in with Esther Helga Gutschmonstier. She runs the International Food Addiction Counselor Training Program in Iceland. And so she was interviewing me and she says, I think you're an early stage food addict. And this was, I don't know, 10 years ago. And I said, yeah, you're probably right. My mom's a food addict, my sister's a food addict. There's definitely that genetic disposition piece, and my behavior around food, is a little, addictive. So, I didn't really have a defense. So that was the start. And then meanwhile, I'm helping people who identify. I worked in a bariatric center, so they didn't necessarily identify as being addicts, but they were addicts, so kind of working on the front lines and being able to help them, but then still like needing my fix when I woke up in the morning and needing to come home and hit the pantry. And I was an artisan bread baker for like 5 or 6 years. I had a bread blog. I baked like four breads a week, like for years. I had 3 starters in my fridge. They all had first names. Like it was crazy, and so I think just kind of putting the pieces together one by one. I got connected with Bitten Johnson, who's the sugar addiction expert out of Sweden. Incredible woman and with an incredible story. And she's basically training people like me to help addicts all over the world. So, and then everything just kind of fell into place. And then I gave up sugar, alcohol, and grains on the same day. And then, gradually I gave up some other things. I gave up caffeine about, 6 months later. And then during that time, I also gave up ADHD meds that I had been on for a very long time. So it's definitely been a process. But I think now it's just practicing what I preach, which is so much easier on my mind to just do what I tell people to do, right? Because I'm in integrity. And so I think it's been really helpful.
Oh, I love that. So tell me, how would you, if somebody is here and they say, oh, maybe I'm a sugar addict, right? So how do you know you are a sugar addict? What defines an emotional eater who just eats a little bit emotionally from time to time, and really somebody who you would call a food or a sugar addict? What is the difference? Where's the fine line?
Right. Yeah. So I mean, we can look at diagnostic criteria. We can look at the diagnostic criteria for substance abuse. We have a tool that's actually called Sugar, and its job is to distinguish between eating disorders and food addiction. And the way that it does that is through the international criteria for substance abuse. So the reality is, if you're looking at food as a substance, then it really doesn't take all that much for a person to meet criteria for substance abuse. I think it's like, with 3 or 4 symptoms, one could be like eating despite consequences. One could be like needing more food to get the same effect. So it really wouldn't be very hard for an individual to be classified as an addict based on that criteria. So there's a couple kind of quick things we use. One is a screening tool. It's called the Uncope, and it asks you 6 yes or no questions. One of the questions is around emotions. One of the questions is around tolerance. So it just kind of goes through. It's just a screening tool, though. It's not a diagnostic tool. And so if you have 2 or more yeses, we should do some more digging. We should take a look. You should really consider having a sugar none so that you can see. And what the sugar does is it takes your life on a chronological line, and it basically shows you at what age did you develop what symptom, and it draws a line. So you could see like, oh, my parents had a divorce when I was 13 and I picked up 4 symptoms at 13. Like, it's very correlated with like stress or situations in our life. It's not that these stresses cause addiction, it's just they give us an impetus to have an outlet. So I think that's really important to understand. And so emotional eaters are like, generally speaking, oh, I really need to push myself away from the table, or kind of things like that. Whereas a food addict can't do that, or they physically do it, but then they come back. So I think that helps distinguish. And then there were 2 guys that ran around the country helping alcoholics get sober, right? And they ran these 3-day workshops, and they came up with this question for alcoholics was, can you stop? That's the first question. The second question is, can you stay stopped? Right? So stopping isn't the problem. We can stop. It's like, you'll hear people say like, yeah, I've quit cigarettes 1,000 times, right? So I think that's the crux of it. Can you stay stopped? So, and that's really where we tie in the model that we use, we call recovery protection, right? And so that's the point. Like, what do I need to do today to stay stopped? And then that I build my life around those things. Not that it controls my life, but they're embedded. They're embedded in my lifestyle.
Okay, sounds amazing. So can you stop? Can you stay stopped? That is definitely for me one of those big takeaways, and I will definitely want to share that with our audience here. And please, if you are here listening to Amazing Talk with Dave today, maybe you want to share in the comments, if you're struggling with emotional eating or actually with food addiction. Maybe you have struggled to stay stopped, right? So if you would like to share that, your struggles around cravings or addiction or emotional eating, share that in the comments or in our Facebook group. Now, Dave, you mentioned your recovery protection. I would love to know more, and I'm sure our listeners want to know more too.
Yeah, so essentially there's a concept in addiction or in recovery called relapse prevention, right? And so relapse and prevention is the process of building a customized plan to support you, to help you prevent relapse. So one thing I want to say about relapse before I go into recovery protection is relapse is a process, just like recovery is a process. They're basically, they're moving in opposite directions, right? I can't be working on a relapse and working on my recovery at the same time. You're either going one way, or I'm going the other way, right? And again, it's a process. So what we did is we just put a positive spin on it, right? And we put our own kind of flavor on it. And so we decided we are going to call it recovery protection, because what could be more important to prevent a relapse than protecting your recovery? Like being able to maintain the ground that you've gained and the momentum that you've had. So, so that's sort of what recovery protection is. And I think it needs to be it really needs to be personalized to the person. So one of the questions we might ask you, right, would be, Like just take a piece of paper and a pen and write down as many answers as you can to this question, like set a timer for 2 minutes and just blast them out. There's no right or wrong answers. It just helps you find information. So the prompt is, I know my recovery is in trouble when ... So what are the elements in your life that you know that your recovery is in trouble? Is it when you're tired? Is it when you're visiting your family? Is it when your family is visiting you? Is it when you're going through a job change? Is it when it's that time of month? Is it, it could be anything. So, and then what we do is we can isolate which warning signs, we call those warning signs, which ones are critical. Like which ones are the ones that if you don't deal with now, it'll be a much greater threat of losing your recovery. Right. And so by making this list, and then you star the ones that are very prominent, the big ones for you, those are called your critical warning signs. And then you build a plan basically around those warning signs so that you can become much, much more aware of them in real time and do something about them. Because oftentimes we don't realize that we're in this pathway. We're like doing fine, and then we just get tired, and then we let go of our routine, and then whatever it is, and then all of a sudden we're like in deep water, and we're like, how'd that happen? So I think it gives us a way to sort of helps us identify, like, as we begin to go deeper and deeper into our disease, and then turning it into the actions that we can take to get ourselves back to where we want to be, back into our deeper recovery, as opposed to being in a deeper relapse. The only thing I want to say about relapse is I think a lot of people perceive a relapse as a return to the drug. So they'd say, like, I relapsed. They'll like pick up the drink, they'll pick up the food, whatever it is, and they'll say, I relapsed. And like for me and for our model, that's the end of your relapse, not the beginning. So when you pick up, that's when your relapse ends, and then you switch over into active addiction, or what we call continued use. So a lot of people think that they're relapsing, where in reality, they're just in active addiction.
So if I understand it right, you say the relapse is obviously the end of not having seen the trigger, the warning signs, right, and dealt with them or planned around them. That's just the outcome of it.
So relapse is like this, it's like a very ongoing, gradual, insidious process. So it's this process that ultimately leads you to the drug. So I think the important piece is that it doesn't start with the drug or the food or the drink, or whatever your behavior is. It ends with it.
Yeah.
The relapse process ends with picking up. It doesn't start with picking up. Because I think a lot of people focus on, well, I picked up. And it's like, yeah, but why did you pick up? What are the things that were working for you? It's the funniest thing. So addicts will do this. They'll be like, why'd you stop? And they'll say something like, I don't know, it was working. And it's just like, it's just the insanity of the disease of the brain, is that we stop the things that work.
Yeah.
It's like, or we try to get away with not doing them every day or whatever it is. And then it's the next thing. It's the next checkpoint. It's the next checkpoint. It's the next checkpoint. And all of a sudden, picking up sounds like a really good idea. Going to the store and getting what you always get to feel better, right? So to kind of remove the pain.
So do you think there is some self-sabotage in there as well that plays a role?
I think it's really biochemical. So I think, like, when we look at like pain and pleasure and all that, and do addicts have a tendency to self-sabotage? Sure. It certainly looks like that on paper. But I also think it's the disease. I don't think it's necessarily the addict. It's the way the disease operates. So it's cunning and it's baffling, right? It'll confuse you. It'll make you think like you're doing the right thing when you're doing the wrong thing. So I think, I don't know. I'm definitely not in the emotional eating camp, right? Like, so the people that come to see me, Like they know what they're going to get. So I think, and it's really funny because we run these 5-day educational events, and like, if you come back to day 2, like there were some hurdles for you to jump, for you to be like, I'm willingly going to go and attend day 2. So
Mm.
we usually have a drop off between day 1 and day 2, because we hit people hard about addiction on day 1, and we do
Yeah.
that on purpose because we don't want the wrong people.
Yeah.
But I think it's funny, and I definitely think that people will go through, they'll be on day 3, they'll be on day 4, and they'll be like, oh, I am not ready for this. And that's okay. It's okay
Mm.
if you're not ready yet. But I think it opens that door. It opens the mind a little bit
Yeah.
to a new way of life. So I don't know if it's emotional or not, but I think when we look at emotions, so an emotion is a biochemical response to a shift in our neurotransmitters, and then that leads us to a thought, which leads us to a feeling, which leads us to another thought. So when I break down, is it emotional? Well, even our emotions are biochemical. So I don't know, how do you differentiate? It's hard.
Well, but it's interesting to see, and I think that's for everybody also to pay attention to, right? Is it the biochemical response? What is playing there? And like you said earlier, that goes also a little bit in the trigger, right? What is the main trigger here? And when we get clear on that, we can obviously work on a plan to not get there, right? To then relapse and go for the sugar or the food or whatever it is, right? That is our drug. Now, I wonder actually as well, when you relapse, a lot of people say, okay, fine, now I ate the candy or the sugar or the ice cream or whatever it is, right, in that way, and might as well continue eating. What is a great response or a way to respond to prevent that from a relapse? It's a full-blown going back to addiction habits.
So sort of, how do you stop it? Like, how do you prevent it from escalating?
Yes.
I mean, I think in the perfect world, we see the truth before. So we're conscious of, if I do A, B will result, right? So for me, like, I know as clear as day, and it's important for me to know as clear as day, that if I eat X, Y, and Z, A, B, C is going to happen, right? I'm going to lose control. I'm going to become selfish. I'm going to become isolated. I'm not going to care. I'm like that. So that's becomes clear to me. So that's, I can look at that. And I also use a tool that's called memory of the pain. So memory of the pain is like creating a vignette about like where the drug is taking you, so that you can remember the pain, so that you don't have to relapse. But I think community is the big piece that's missing. I think that we need to be able to, what we call telling on our red dog, which is like telling on our disease, or like telling on ourselves when we like start to feel like we're getting shaky. And that enables us to level the playing field. It enables us to let go of the guilt and shame, because addiction is so tightly woven with guilt and shame.
Mm.
And in fact, when we opened business, but when we were planning to open, we said, what is our primary goal? The 3 of us met, and what came out of that conversation was to remove the guilt and shame,
Mm.
because this is a disease. This is an illness. This isn't your fault. It's just the way it is. You're biochemically very sensitive. And that sensitivity actually gives us a lot of gifts that a lot of, like, addicts capture nuance like no one else can capture nuance. Like we notice, we're super aware, like you can't slip anything by us. We're just really sensitive and heightened. So when we get to that place, that's an asset, right? But if I were to drug, it becomes a major liability. So I think, and my mom, who's one of my partners, says that, like, for every asset we have, there's a liability, right?
Yeah.
For every trait, there's an asset and liability, right? So
Yeah.
how do you find that, that happy medium? And we have varied traits. We're humans.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier community connection is very important, and that is part of your care formula, right?
Right,
CPR.
right. So we think it's super important. Like we say, connection is your best protection. So being able to connect with others, but also being able to connect with yourself, to to ask yourself those hard questions and wait for those answers, and to kind of become human again. I think as a result of putting the drug down, we can do that. But I think that having the community there, having that sort of network behind you, having these like real meaningful, hard conversations with people about real things, where we're not talking about the weather and how the kids are doing. We're talking about what's really going on in our lives, and it enables us to become vulnerable, which might seem scary, but it has a lot of the benefits that enable us to grow and be uncomfortable and be comfortable being uncomfortable and all those things. Whereas a lot of the situations that used to make us use, they don't have to make us use anymore. Like the job of my recovery is to basically solve the problems that my disease creates. And if my recovery doesn't solve those problems, I need to shift. I need to pivot.
Okay.
And that, I think that connects back with our warning signs. Really knowing, where am I weak? Where are my weaknesses? So that I can attack them. Because the disease is going to attack my weaknesses, whether I like it or not. It's like that childhood game, Red Rover. Like when there's two lines of kids separated and one sends one over to run through and they try to break through people's hands, they're going to go after the weakest link.
Yeah, of
Where it's
course.
the smallest kid or whatever, right? And so that's just, the disease does the same thing. It's going to find a port of entry and it's going to force its way in. So we need to constantly be reinforcing those areas of susceptibility.
So prevention is
reinforces all that. Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah.
Awareness, prevention, having a plan in place, right? You mentioned connection earlier. Now, a lot of people with, the last kind of 2 years, through the pandemic, obviously have struggled with this, and I'm sure it has had a huge effect. What would you say would be a good way of overcoming these issues around maybe having less connection and being more endangered?
I think that there's still tons of ways for us to maintain real relationships and real conversations and sort of build that back up. I think that sometimes we have to do it through technology. But at this point, if I feel isolated, it's because I'm isolating myself. And I think that the channel, we have Zoom, right? You can get a free account and talk to someone for up to 40 minutes, multiple people even. I mean, at this point, I think they're excuses. And what is that? Is that the disease operating to try to keep you alone? Because he knows what happens when you're alone. So I think we have to start to break it down. But I think it has been hard for a lot of people. I mean, there are elements of it that have been really challenging for me, right? People that rely on in-person meetings for their recovery. That was a big hole that people had to fill, and they had to use Zoom. And was it the same? Absolutely not. But did it work? Yeah, it worked for the people that did it. It worked for the people that were committed to it. So I think it does pose a threat. But I think that there are workarounds, and like, I have to be careful that I'm not fooling myself, because if I'm fooling myself, I have a lot to lose.
Yeah, very true. Wow, that's amazing. That is really giving a good idea on understanding a little bit more what is important to overcome addiction, knowing that I think you have always to be on the outlook, right? You always have to be aware of there can be something out there that can kind of hit you, like you said earlier, can go through the barriers.
Right. We say be on guard for the unguarded moment, because there's going to be a moment when you're not.
Yeah. So having
you're
a plan
tired
for that.
or you're stressed. And yeah, I think that's the key about understanding our warning signs, right? And okay, and we like have a index card, right? And you have a cue, and you have a custom and a consequence. This is the 3 C's, by the way. So you have a cue. Your cue is like it's 3 o'clock. My custom is I get a coffee and a muffin when it's 3 o'clock because I'm tired. And then my consequence is that I feel guilt and shame. So what could you do as a custom instead of having coffee, and a muffin. Right? And you write this down on a card. So you have the trigger and then you have the alternate customs. You could go for a brisk walk.
Yeah.
You could wash your face with cold water. You could engage in a interesting conversation with someone. You could phone someone that understands what you're going through. Any of those things are going to refill your energy. And then, but they'll lead to a positive consequence. Feeling more connected, feeling less isolated, feeling less exhausted, feeling the energy, feeling part of instead of apart from. So I think that we can just switch it. We just switch because we can't change our personality, but we can change our behavior. So
it's basically
that's key.
a replacement habit that you have for.
Well, yeah, I think if you really break it down, it's like a cognitive behavioral tool. It's just where you're thinking, how could you change your thinking, and how could that change your results? But I have to be careful that I'm not replacing harm with less harm, right? And I think a lot of people, for me, like there's a lot of people that work in the harm reduction model, and I am not one of them. So some people are like, eat less sugar, eat less. That's not my camp, right? So because I think that the brain can't heal if you continue to use the drug. So I think it's really important that we're clear and that the guidance we're getting is best for where we are. Has harm reduction works for people and for addicts? Yeah, at least in the short term it has. I think ultimately I'm still fighting. I'm still struggling. I'm still fighting the dragon regularly because the drug's still in my system. I haven't gotten that peace of mind. That's been my experience anyway. And there are people that it works for and they like it. There are people that identify as alcoholics and drink on occasion. It's never worked for me.
Yeah. Okay, wow. Now, what would you say would be the first step or really an important step for somebody to take who listened today and who said, oh, maybe I want to take some action? What would you tell them?
I think it goes back to this connecting piece, that finding people that co-resonate with what you're dealing with, so you're not just like attacking it alone. So I know we run two public access groups. One's Thursday, 4 p.m. Eastern. It's free, it's public access. And then we also run a room on Clubhouse. So I think that's one way. It's called The Fork in the Road. It's run by my colleague, Jen Unwin, and my partner, Anna Freeling. So I think that's one way to just trying to start to find your people. So you're not just like doing this alone. I think environment plays a big factor. So if you're, it's like if you're in a cigarette factory, you're bound to smoke eventually, So I think that plays a really role. And so we know that the 5 places where we make the most food decisions take place in the home, the local restaurant, the local supermarket, work, and our kids' school. So basically, if we can control those 5 zones, it covers like 80% of it. So, but really starting at home, I think is really important, especially if you have littles. Creating a dynamic where they can be successful too. And it's going to be really hard for you to say no to the drug if you have to face it all the time. In the drug and alcohol world, they call that booze fighting. It's like it just doesn't work well. So we have something that we use, we call it the cupboard clean out, and we kind of challenge people to show us the before and afters. And I think that helps people a lot. It gets them really committed. I think the other part of that care model is action steps. So getting involved in the actions that are going to build what I call recovery quotient. They're going to build the likelihood of you being able to stay clean today. So I think that's a really big first step. And the other one is, the awareness and admitting, even if just to other food addicts, that like, yeah, I'm here because I need help. Those 3 words, I need help, those words will save your life. If you ask the right person those 3 words, you'll get help. They'll want to help.
And I really liked your before and after cupboard clean out. That's a great reminder as
Yeah.
well, right? So these are definitely amazing tips. Now, I want to be sure people can take away something so they can continue their journey and actually implement it. And I know you have an amazing gift. Will you share that with us?
Yeah. So I'm going to take you through three processes. The one of them we went through briefly, but I'll repeat it. And then, so we have the 3 C's, then we have the trigger-free triangle, and then we have the 3 P's. And so if you put these three things together, you can identify, you can sort of begin to create a recovery protection plan for yourself. So the first thing is we go back to the prompt, and the prompt is, I know my recovery is in trouble when. And so we ascertain that there are multiple different kinds of cues. It could be time of day, they could be feelings, they could be situation like watching the football game at home. It could be anything really. It could be a smell, smelling someone, like the kitchen's right here. Like if my wife makes toast, I smell the toast, right? What's the cue? The cue is when I smell toast, I want toast, right? And so the custom is I would make toast. And the consequence is my stomach would hurt. I would feel lousy. I would break the recovery that I have. I would go in an endless cycle, right? So I can do a simple custom would be I smell the toast. I take a break and I leave the area and I walk around outside for 15 minutes. So I don't have to smell it while she's eating it. And I don't have to hear the knife crunching on the crust, all those things. Those are triggers, right? And as an addict, I'm very sensitive to that stuff. That's like, it's like watching someone shoot up to me. It's very visceral. Like I feel that. So I think and then what we do is when we go through that custom, we take it through the trigger-free triangle, which is guilt, debate, and romance. So I need to figure out what am I being triggered by? Am I being triggered by guilt? Am I being triggered by debate? Or am I being triggered by romance? Or am I being triggered by 2 or 3? So the debate is definitely there. Should I or shouldn't I eat the toast? Should I, shouldn't I? Should I, shouldn't I? The guilt for me would follow the indulgence. But the romance is like the sound and the longing and the desire. So for me, that's a very sensitive cue for me, right? For me, it hits all 3 points on the triangle. So it's definitely like I have to identify that as a very strong warning sign for me, especially if I'm not on my game, right? And then what we do is we plan the 3 P's, which is the third step, is plan, prepare, and protect. And my mom's like all about this. She calls it the 3 P's. So you plan, prepare, and protect. So we have a plan in place. So again, that goes to the cue, that goes to the trigger, it goes to the warning sign. What's the plan? I will do this and this when this happens. Like, because it's very itemized. Is I will do this action, this action, this action, this action. Prepare is I get the pieces of the puzzle put together so I can do that. So for instance, like if you're planning your food, you plan it, you write a list, you get it, you procure it, it's in your fridge.
Yeah.
You prepare it. I prepare the food. I have it cooked. I have the vegetables I need, the meat I need, the fats I need, that's all ready to go. Maybe I have a meal that I make once per week that just sits in the fridge just in case I'm feeling like I'm not okay. And then protect, I do the things I need to do to protect my recovery.
Yeah.
So the planning, the getting, the prep, and then it goes into the prepping. So it's on hand, and then the protecting so I can protect my recovery. Because if you do those 3 things based on the trigger, based on what elements of the triangle it had, you have a personalized recovery protection plan for this specific cue. So then if you go through the cues that you have and you do these 3 steps for all the cues, the triangle will help you identify which ones are critical, which ones have 2 or more of the elements of the triangle. And then the 3 P's is going to give you the, okay, so what now? What do I do? And there you go. You have a customized recovery protection plan just for you. And it doesn't have to work for anyone else. It just has to work for you. Like my plan isn't going to work for you. Your plan's not going to work for me. That's just the way it is. My disease is my disease. Yours operates differently. So the only disease I need to treat is mine. And that's what it goes back to, like, my recovery needs to answer the problems that my disease creates, whether that's low self-esteem, insecurity, exhaustion, mental fatigue. Like, my recovery needs to cover those things.
Yeah. That is amazing. That is so helpful for many people. I'm sure many people took frantically notes here. And I would love for you guys as well, really, to share in the comments or in our Facebook group, what are your cues and what is your intended recovery plan that you can put based on what Dave shared with us here in action. That's super good. Thank you for sharing that. Now, Dave, I know you have a gift as well, the Craving Crusher checklist, I think. Tell us what that is.
Yeah, so the Craving Crusher checklist is basically like, we decided that when we started our recovery, we didn't have any of this. Like, we didn't have the tools, we didn't have the knowledge, we didn't have the information. So we wanted to put it all and bring it all together. And so what we did was we presented our first 5-day Crush Your Cravings challenge, which was on April 21. And basically we just laid out all the tools on a platter and said, here. What we did was we turned that into a book. And so that's what the Craving Crusher checklist is. So it's going to go through understanding the brain, where your addiction comes from. It's going to teach about the connection piece that you need. It's going to teach about the eliminating threats in your environment. It's going to teach you about the food, the do's and don'ts. It's going to talk about the toxic triangle, which are the 3 elements that you can avoid to kind of creating your health right now and also eliminating cravings. And then it goes through these staying stopped tools, right? And it's going to go through in depth the 3 C's, which we talked about, and it's going to give you one to fill out, as well as the triangle and how to sort of apply it with the 3 C's. So I think it's really, really valuable.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for that generous gift. That's really
my pleasure.
Thank you. I know that you are on social, so we will share with you here on the side all the links to, I think, Facebook and Instagram and everything, obviously your website as well, and for your gift. What is the biggest aha moment that you think attendees should be taking away from today?
Well, I think that we need to first identify that this isn't our fault, that we have a very special brains, and we were likely the people in the past that survived. Like, we have a brain that's hardwired to survive. The problem is that our environment has shifted so much. And that, like, we used to need to like an addict would have been, like, in the past would have been like, come on, Stu, let's get an antelope, we're out of food, and they would just get up and go, right? But now you like drive 2 miles and you have food, drugs everywhere at your disposal, and they're cheap, right? So the environment, I think, plays a role. But the other thing I really want to hone in on is that this isn't a willpower problem. Willpower will never work for this. And the reason is because the disease operates in a much simpler part of the brain. It operates in your limbic system, which is your reward center. Or your reward center is in your limbic system. But basically, like, if you've ever trained a dog, you use positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement, right? And it's like if I do this, I'll get a treat. If I don't do this, I won't, And so it's actually how we teach kids too, So it's how we domesticate all beings, really. But the point is that that's how disease operates. And so it perceives that when you're in the throes of addiction, that if you don't pick up a fix, that you'll die, which is false. You won't die. But that's why willpower won't work. You're not going to be able to think your way out of this one.
Yeah.
And that's why I really want to harness in on the action steps that you can take, because you're not going to think your way out of this one. You're going to have to act your way out. So I think that's the take home is start to become aware of how this operates in your life, so you can start to attack it. So you don't just have to be protective and defensive. You can actually be offensive. You can attack your disease, because trust me, your disease will attack you.
So it's about planning, taking the action, right? And
it's about action. Yes, like and talk about like math-based goals instead of like thought-based goals. So a math-based goal is like, I will work on my recovery protection plan for 15 minutes every day, no matter what.
Yeah.
That's a math-based goal. It's based on time or numbers and a thought-based goal is like, I work on my recovery plan when I have time.
Of course.
That's not going to work. You're not going to do it.
Okay.
If it's not on your calendar, you're not going to do it either. So make it real.
That's amazing. Dave, you shared so much. I've taken notes here. There's really amazing insights that you shared to help people to overcome addiction, right? And get on the right way. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
And thank you so much for being on the Food Freedom Festival. Bye-bye.